Welcome back to the Bandwich Tapes. I'm Brad Williams. On today's episode, I'm having a conversation with Maeve Gilchrist. Maeve is a Scottish-born harpist who now lives in New York. We talk about her incredible career, the beginnings of playing harp with her family, and eventually moving to the United States to study music at Berklee, and then some of the amazing collaborations that she's done over her career, including Victor Krauss and performing on one of my daughter's favorites, the soundtrack to How to Train Your Dragon. It's a fascinating conversation, and Maeve is just a wonderful human being, and I really enjoyed talking with her, and I think you'll really enjoy her words. So here's my conversation with Maeve Gilchrist. Maeve, it's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Welcome. How are you?
I'm great. I'm delighted to chat to you, Brad. I've heard great things about this podcast, and I looked it up and checked out your other guests, and it's always a pleasure to talk music.
Big thanks to our mutual friend, now my mutual friend of the podcast, Victor Krauss, for connecting us together. I know he is just an amazing human being.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's one of my favorite musicians on the planet, just for his really unique ears and aesthetic, and he's one in a million, and he's a great guy as well. He's a kind human being. He
is, and I would say that in the amount of time that I've been enjoying your music, and since he told me about you, I started listening and I haven't stopped. I'm just such a fan of your playing and everything that you're doing. And I would say that the two of you remind me of each other in that there seems to be no boundaries between what you guys do musically. I feel like you're up for any type of musical opportunity that comes your way. At least that as a fan of yours, that's the way I see it.
Well, it's true. Yeah, I am a musician of many appetites and really enjoy the chance to collaborate with a number of different musicians. And you're right that I as soon as I met Victor, even with our significantly different cultural backgrounds and coming from very different places in the world, I'm from Edinburgh, Scotland, I immediately felt like he was a kindred spirit of sorts, and I'm not sure if he told you much about how we first started making music together, but we met at the Berklee Roots Music Festival. The Berklee College of Music ran this Roots Music Festival for a couple of years, and we would all teach our respective classes, and then would get together, as you do at these type of things, for a faculty concert. And there's never enough rehearsal time, and you're in the corridor behind the theatre, just kind of trying to rehearse everyone's music, and Victor had me play on a couple of his tunes, and I was so taken with the presence of breath. I loved his tempos. He always takes it slower than I am brave enough to take it, and it creates this ambience, and it forces you to approach tone in a different way, and intonation, and make more intentional choices. And I loved just, those couple of tunes on the concert, and we started sending each other voice memos back and forth, and really came up with our whole album, Vignette. I'm forgetting the name, Vignette, that way. And it was the easiest music making process I've ever been part of. And still, if I want ears on something, I'll always send it to Victor. He's a great bouncing off point for ideas and kind of creative clarity of all kinds. So yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he such a beautiful project that you did together, and Just have really enjoyed listening to it, and you can really sense the collaborative energy that you two brought, and I think that middle ground it was, you can really sense that it was, a like you said, a kindred spirits with each other, and it felt like you had played with each other for 20 years before that project happened, but in reality it probably wasn't that long at all before you played
Oh
together.
no. I mean, it was really just those, a couple of days in Boston that happened once or twice, and then we were in touch a lot. But it was easy, and I'm actually, even though I do a lot of collaborative playing, when it comes to composing, I can be very dogged in my ideas. I have no idea how Victor would respond to that in regard to his own creative process. But for me, I'm when it's my music, I'm generally pretty in my own head and happy making all the choices. And I'm also completely happy turning that side of me off and being a side member and trying to contribute towards whatever musical environment I'm part of. But in regards to composition, I'm usually pretty much a one-man show. And this really was collaborative. I mean, almost every tune was 20-second vamp that he sent, and then I'd write a B section or create a melody, or it was a joy, and we keep saying we have to do it again. And there's not a massive market for harp and bass duo material, but it's on our minds. And meanwhile, we're continually contributing to other projects. He just recorded some on my very slow in the making album, and I just played on a couple of recordings that he produced. And we're often in one another's orbit, but another record is in the front of our minds.
Okay, well, I'm gonna cross my fingers that's going to happen somewhere down the road, because really enjoyed listening to what you guys have done together so far. So it's really wonderful. My 14-year-old daughter, as I was telling her about having a conversation with you today and telling her just a list of some of your incredible accomplishments, she was most happy to hear about you playing on the How to Tame Your Dragon, the Hidden World soundtrack. she was like, okay, that's really cool. You need to ask her about that.
That was really cool. And actually, I also, it was the third movie that I did when I first connected with John Powell. And then I also just, the one that just came out, the new digital version, we re-recorded that too. And I think I'm allowed to say it. I hope I'm allowed to say it. We also just recorded a bunch of kind of folky versions of the theme. There's a new, actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. We just recorded a bunch of folky versions of the themes for related projects in the future. So
cool.
I feel personally connected to these creatures. And I really love the movie, actually. I mean, I've got a soft spot for all things fantasy, but the dragons were so cute, weren't they?
We went to see the new movie, and my wife and daughter and I all sat in the theater and wiped tears away, because it's such a beautiful story. But the music, it set such a beautiful tone, with the story. It was really nice.
Yeah. John Powell is incredible. I mean, just the scale in which he's working, and the amount of massive projects for which he's at the helm. Just with that in mind, it's incredible the detail with which he writes these scores and is on top of every single element. Like all people who are film scoring on this scale, he'll have assistants and this and that, but working with him in the studio is amazing. He hears everything, and he's a very humble, curious, open guy, and he's constantly listening for like another direction this could go. He hears every voicing of every chord. Like the orchestrations that he does are really stunning. And but most of all, like being in the studio with him, it's wonderful how curious he is and how open he is in this pretty rigid Hollywood setting of encouraging the musicians to bring themselves and their own musical personality to these scores as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, those recording projects have to, I mean, it's quick, right? And because time is money. So for him to encourage people to kind of bring their voice to it, that's good in such a high pressure environment is that it has to
Yeah,
be. Yeah.
yeah. No, he is cool as a cucumber and just a nice chap.
That's nice. How did you start working together? How did that relationship begin?
No, it's not a great. I mean, it's just not a super interesting story. But my Dan Coleman, who runs Red Brick Publishing, um, uh, does I would say our publishing, but like most people in the business at this point are connected with Red Brick, either for publishing administration or for their publishing rights or licensing stuff. And he connected us. I think if I remember correctly, for the first one that I was part of, he recorded the harp parts a couple of times and wanted someone to bring more of a authentic Celtic feel. And Dan was like, "Oh, you should try Maeve. She can read. I'm actually not a great reader, but she can read. But she's from a traditional background, so she'd be able to bring that." And
Yeah, well, it's wonderful, wonderful playing. As we're recording this, so are you just finishing up? Have you been doing a tour? What have you been?
I have. I've
doing?
been traveling a ton the last while. These last few weeks, it's primarily been with Arouj Aftab, who's a wonderful artist who I've been working with for a long time. We've been playing music around 15 years. I've known her over 20. We went to Berklee College together.
So good. Yeah, it's such wonderful music hearing you guys play together. So good.
She's fantastic. And like Victor in a different way, she's also an incredibly patient musician and allows things to unfold really beautifully, and she's crafted this very unique aesthetic over the last few years. So we just came back. It's Canadian Jazz Festival season, so we just came back from the Montreal Jazz Festival, the Ottawa Jazz Festival, Toronto Jazz Festival. We were down in Sao Paulo, playing the C6 Festival there in Brazil, where, a side note, I heard for the first time the great Amaro Frieti, Brazilian pianist, who him and his band just blew me away. And we were at the Spoleto Festival. So a lot of stuff with the Rouge. I went back to Charleston the week after just to play a solo concert, and there was a big Scottish music event. But the kind of I have a young daughter. She's almost 20 months, and this last year I've not been traveling for as long periods for obvious reasons. And I've kind of been honing in on the projects just to not be away so much right now. So I've been mainly touring with Arouge, with Silk Road Ensemble, and then doing my own stuff.
Yeah, and I know, speaking from experience, how your priorities certainly shift as a parent, right? Have you noticed any artistic differences being a parent? Do you approach playing music differently now? Does it? I know for me, it just felt like everything that I did, I just did it a little better, or maybe it just connected on a different emotional level for me after having children. How's that experience been for you?
That's a great question. I mean, it's not the same question. I could immediately answer that I've become more efficient in my preparation and in my creative process.
Sure,
like I've
absolutely.
gotten much better at using the time that I have. But I like thinking about, has it affected the way I play? I don't know. I think you're right that there's an emotional depth that I sometimes reach. I mean, actually, I found since I have my daughter that things touch me in a very tangible way sometimes. Maybe it's because I'm not touring quite as much. It's a thrill, like this last tour with Arouge. It was Arouge and then trio, all musicians that I've known for about 20 years, drum, bass, harp. And it just, it's not lost on me what a like weird and wonderful thing it is that I'm getting to solo on every song to these incredibly appreciative audiences as a Celtic harp player at a jazz festival. Do you know,
Yes,
there's things
absolutely.
that I'm often struck by, even though that musical diversity has long been a part of what I do. But there's at least these last few weeks, I found it thrilling to do what I do, and just so deeply satisfied that there's room for it all, because I think that's always the fear when you, whether it's a family or some other huge life opportunity or change of direction, is that somehow you'll be sacrificing, or it'll negatively impact what you already have going on, or you won't be able to give fully to all the different areas of your life. And I'm so lucky to be doing what I do with an incredibly supportive partner, family who's even though they don't live close to us, they're ready to jump in, and musical colleagues who don't stop calling even though I'm not so available. And I think when I get through like this last 8 weeks, I've been in and out every week, and I'm definitely tired all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I get to the end of it and just think, wow, like I loved it. I loved the music. I love coming back to my family. I feel so lucky that this is the life I am managing, touch wood, to juggle, even if I'm really tired or have food on my shirt. Like our listeners can't see, but you can, Brad.
Well, it is, speaking personally, there's no job I've ever had better in my life than to be the parent of 2 children. And, it for me, it just, it changed my perspective on things. And you're right. You do have to be more efficient, and you do have to be more intentional about your time and, what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to, because, there is a large sacrificial element to it, right? Where it's going to require being away from home for a period of time, or, it's tough sometimes to be away. I certainly understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, all of it. It's tough to be away, and sometimes it's tough to say goodbye to
Mm-hmm.
things that at one point in your life would have been very important to you. It's definitely never been easier for me to say no. The pre-kids life, there's always that juggling of, should I do this? And it's very easy to say no now, and that's lovely, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree. So you from Edinburgh, Scotland, going to go back a little bit and kind of just talk about some of the beginnings. From a musical family, were your parents both musicians as well?
Yeah, a very musical family. My mum wasn't a musician, isn't musical actually. I mean, she'd be the first to tell you. She always said she would have been a great singer if she'd had a great voice, and it's true because she knows how to tell a story. But my mum's Irish from Tipperary, and in her family, she's got sisters who are professional harpers, the Irish harp, and I've got many, many cousins on that side who are great traditional Irish musicians. I've got a couple of classical musicians on that side. And then my dad is an amateur piper himself, but he's a music critic. He has written about music and reviewed music his whole life, and is, despite a lifetime of working in the industry, is still the most passionate listener and consumer of music I've ever met in my life. So my parents were both very involved in the traditional music scene in Edinburgh. So there was musicians in the house all the time. There was poets in the house. They were also very involved with this Scottish nationalist movement, an independent Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And then also because of my dad's very varied musical tastes in the house, when there wasn't live traditional Scottish music, there was music of all kinds on the stereo. There was Ravi Shankar and Pink Floyd and Steve Reich and
Oh,
Joni
wow.
Mitchell and everything you can think of. So I'm very lucky that I had such artistic color and a sense of cultural identity in the house from a young age.
Yeah.
And also just because I learned music by ear before I learned to read and write, I still believe that the folk music pedagogy path is a really, truly valuable one. Because of the emphasis on joyful music making. I mean, when I was given my harp or when I started playing the piano, it was immediately assumed I'd be making music with other people. I was allowed to sit in on the jam sessions with musicians who were much more experienced than I was. And but this emphasized the importance of the sum of all our parts. You know, when you get those tunes going, it's the overall engine of sound that's the goal. It's what you're contributing towards. Individual mastery is much less important, and you know, being shut up in a practice room just wouldn't have been the right path for me, the type of kid I was. But this very social, informal approach to music making was perfect for me, and it drew me deeper and deeper. And then I did become a total music nerd and wanted to practice all the time. But it wasn't when I was a teenager, that's for sure.
Well, and I would imagine, you know, well, a couple of things from that. Number one, yeah, understanding from an early age that collaborative energy of just all of these different music makers being in a room together, just playing it. It's setting you up for success in that way in your career, but also having a family of listening to Pink Floyd or Steve Reich, which amazing. It's probably tearing down some of those walls of understanding that there isn't this compartment of music and this compartment of music. It's all just one thing. And you were learning early on to understand how to not to put, you know, limits on what you can play on your instrument.
You're totally right. And I've never thought about it actually that way, because in a way it was a hard learning curve as well, because you're right, there were no limits in our household growing up, and good music was good music. And as I came of age, you know, I moved to America, I went to Berklee, and as I was starting to perform and hone a sound, I'm using, you know, air quotation marks, yeah, I use that very lightly. But at a certain point in my life, post-college, through my 20s, there was kind of a rude awakening, because in the industry, there are expectations, especially when you're young and new and shapeable. People will constantly tell you that you should do this or do that, or that in order to have a successful career, you need to choose you know, your genre and how you're going to market yourself. And and it's taken me a long time, especially in my, you know, I'm going to be 40 this year, but I'd say in my 20s, it was an incredible ride. I mean, Berklee was an unbelievable place. It was perfect for me. I was a musician whose best asset was her ears, you know, like recognizing colors, and surrounded by musicians from across the globe who were all improvisers and who were all responding in the same way. And then at the same time, the arc of curriculum there allowed me to start putting names and labels on what these colors were, and learn basic harmony. And then I left Berklee having been so supported. I was one of the lucky ones that we had a full ride, and they really kind of let me do what I want. I mean, I took percussion classes, and I took like electric bass labs, and took my harp into the Joe Lovano horn master classes. And I wasn't a harp major actually at Berklee. I was a voice major, which is embarrassing to admit because I'm a mediocre singer at best, and I rarely sing anymore. But they were very open with me, just kind of doing my own thing, and I was so grateful for that. But I came out with all of these influences, and it took me a while. You know, like I would listen back to the music I was making in my early 20s, and I don't think it was very musical or subtle, or, you know, like I was cutting and pasting styles all over the place, and it was like really bad fusion. And but I was having a ball. But I got kind of slammed, honestly, by the critics in Scotland and stuff. There was headlines like, you know, the future of Scottish music, what a disappointment. Just,
Oh,
I
yeah.
got, which now I can laugh at,
Yeah.
but at the time it was such an, like an identity crisis. And, I think when you're a young, very talented musician, or a kid who's very talented, you get raised up and up and up, and you get a lot of attention, and then you reach a certain age and there are these expectations. And I think my own experience has, I hope, made me more empathetic with younger musicians that I encounter, and just allow grace periods for those of us who aren't staying within the box. I'm sure, and I'm not comparing myself to any of these giants, because that's not who I am at all. But when I look at some of the musicians who I've been most inspired by, or who've influenced me the most, people like Joni Mitchell, Jaco Pastorius, Nina Simone, like, these are all musicians who had to go through their own incredibly unique periods of exploration and incubation for each musical stage, and it's what made them who they are. And I don't think that's always recognized in press, or in this, in the world of the Grammys, where there's, these very clear lines for things. Yeah. I'm like kind of rambling now. I don't even necessarily have a point with that, except I think, coming out a little bit, especially the last 10 years, I've really found the joy of just making music that I love again. And I think I'm saying that pretty earnestly. I also feel like I probably put in a lot of years of making bad music, and have refined, I hope, my own aesthetic sense through that process. And I've been very lucky to have incredible mentors, and also work with musicians of the highest caliber, who themselves are kind of open, and in that generous, kind setting, I've been able to find my feet in a way that at least I'm comfortable with a lot more. And in a way, it's really exhilarating, because I'm suddenly very energized to make music again, just to kind of create my own music. Whereas, again, after that kind of rude awakening post college, in my early 20s, I kind of went under the covers a little bit. I really prioritized sideman work, which was a huge education, and I worked on my own chops, and I started to think about, which I probably should have done earlier, okay, if I'm going to make music under my own name, what do I want that to sound like? Instead of just kind of vomiting everything that I'd absorbed, as a child, as a college student, as a young adult music maker and listener, what do I like? What aesthetic do I want to create? What world do I want to build to invite an audience in? And then how can I intentionally create that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and as you mentioned, those greats like Joni Mitchell, Jocko, and Nina Simone, I can say, as the person sitting over here talking about you, the thing that I appreciate about you, that I appreciate about them, is that the whatever musical situation they found themselves in, you always know that it's them. They had a
Mhm.
voice, and they had an identity, a musical identity. And of all the different collaborations that I've heard of yours so far, I know that it's you, and you have a beautiful musical identity that comes through in the way you play, and I appreciate that very much as a lover of music. So it's what you've been trying to accomplish. I would say that you've been successful at
Thank you, Brad. That means a lot.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And zeroing in on a project specifically of yours, I'm a big fan of the Harp Weaver. I've really enjoyed listening to that. Just some beautiful the compositional work on it, the way that it was recorded, just the choices on that album are just, they're fantastic. And I encourage everyone listening to seek it out and listen to it, because it's a wonderful project.
Thank you. It's I'm dying to ask you about your own background. I know that's not why we're doing the podcast, but I'm presuming you're a musician of sorts, and perhaps you've had this experience. But whenever I embark on a project that really holds me, it kind of carries me away. It starts out an idea that I had, and it carries me with it. And the Harp Weaver is an example of that. The Harp Weaver, of course, comes from the poem, The Ballad of the Harp Weaver by Edna St. Vincent Millay, who was an American Jazz Age celebrity poet in America. She was a huge name. She toured America giving recitations of her poetry, and just an example of the scale at which she was working was she would sell out the Hollywood Bowl 2 nights in a row, just her sitting on the stage, reading her poetry. And I came across her poetry via Elizabeth Bishop, to whom she was a mentor of sorts. And a lot of her poetry is very easily digestible. It almost comes across as superficial on the first read, and the deeper you go, the more you get from it. And I loved this poem, The Ballad of the Harp Weaver, and it's a story of a mother and her son facing pretty bleak economic circumstances. And I'm not going to spoil the story for listeners, but I don't think it spoils the story to say that the harp saves the day. One of the few things in their house that they can't sell is this harp with a woman's head. And I loved how the harp was portrayed as giving back. And I think as someone who's an instrumentalist, someone who can get very caught up in technique and mastery of an instrument, we forget how much these instruments bring to our lives and give to us sonically in other ways. And when I think of what the harp, and I'm speaking of the Celtic harp, the instrument I play, it's brought me from one side of the Atlantic to another and gifted me with an incredible music community and incredible opportunities. And so it started as a suite of music written for harp and string quartet that was inspired by the words of Millay and weaves her poetry through a lot of the compositions. But it ended up also just being a celebration of the harp, and is kind of unabashedly indulgent in times and very sentimental. And a lot of the melodic material that I was working with at the time, before I even came across the poem, and when I did, they seemed to just align aesthetically, was melodies that were of the Irish immigrant dance hall scenes at the turn of the century. So, we all know the Irish came to America in the millions at the turn of the century. They faced a lot of persecution, the Catholics, in their own country. There was the famine that I always like to clarify wasn't a famine. It was that all the food from the farms in Ireland was exported to England and other countries, so they didn't have access to their own food. So they came over. They fought in the Civil War. They became very involved in infrastructure and building of the railroads, building of the subways. And among these communities, there was tons of musicians. And where I am in New York, and also thinking of Boston and Chicago, those 3 cities in particular were such hubs of Irish communities, and they would have dance halls, and these dance halls were kind of melting pots for different musical styles. You'd have your fiddle player from the west of Ireland in Sligo, that's a very particular, heavily ornamented style of Irish fiddle playing. You'd have your Sligo fiddler, and then you'd also have like a local Broadway pianist and maybe a saxophone player, and a lot of the melodies that came out of this era are so unique in the way they use harmony and quite sentimental sounding. You can imagine Broadway versions of a lot of these tunes. Singers, I'm not sure if you know, like John McCormack was a famous opera singer at the turn of the century from Ireland. He sang a lot of these melodies, and I've always loved them, even though in a way they're kind of looked down upon in the real traditional Irish music scenes, because they're very much from the New World. But it's the music that would have been on in my aunt's drawing room, and I always love these melodies. So a lot of the tunes that you're hearing in the Harp Weaver are inspired by this type of musical melting pot of the migrant scenes in America.
You know, as you were talking about that, and you alluding to it earlier, have you felt at any point this push and pull about honoring the music from Ireland and Scotland and honoring the history and the tradition of it while still wanting to push it forward and maybe in a new direction? Is there ever been any kind of internal struggle about how you want to go with that?
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. And a lot of what I was talking about earlier, in my 20s, was this kind of conflict of feeling like, well, this is the music that I come from, so I've got to utilize this in some way. But these are all these new musical styles and harmonies and colors that I'm coming across that I also want to use. And I think that's where a lot of the bad fusion came in. But I guess a few things in response to your question. First of all, I don't feel responsible anymore for having to innovate on traditional music or having to be the bearer of tradition, but also I don't feel the responsibility so much to be both a bearer of tradition and also a visionary stylist of the music. And I think more and more I'm just content with who I am. And I know that in a way I'm a tradition bearer because it's in me and it's where I come from. And I think a lot of the music I'm making these days might not sound obviously Celtic in ways that some people might expect, but I feel and hear the influence in everything that I touch, in the way that I approach melody, in my ornamental choices, in my love of an engaging melody, even whilst working sometimes in more avant-garde settings. I love to shape a melody. I love to approach harmony in a more linear way. And what I mean by that is Irish music and Scottish music too are both traditional music forms that are not rooted in chord progression. If I look at some of the newer forms of American folk music, like old time, which of course is directly linked to a lot of the Scottish and Irish melodies that came down through Appalachia, but there's this acceptance of, or not acceptance, it's just a way that music is made is often rooted in chord progressions. And same with, if you look at bluegrass, the instrumentalist solos are chord progressions. And it's very common that there's many chordal instruments outlining these progressions. Whereas in Irish music and much of Scottish music, these melodies existed as solo entities before the idea of harmony or arrangement of any kind came in. And the interest and the forward movement in these tunes came from ornamental choices in ever-changing melodic variation, these minute improvisations that happen all the time. And the great traditional melody players are the ones who are able to embody melody with effortlessness and continually embellish it in an improvisatory way. So it's never played the same way twice. And a lot of the harmonic choices often come from this kind of support of what's happening in that ever-changing melody. It's not rooted in one thing. And of course, in contemporary interpretations of the music, there's much more elements of arrangement and rock and pop, and especially since the folk revival in the 60s and 70s, a lot of these bands have been kind of fusing different elements from different styles, which is great. But if we're talking about traditional music, it's really linear. And excuse me. And I feel like it's probably my instrument as well, and some of the harmonic challenges that it brings. But I'm really rooted in that kind of gradual morphing of harmony and textural development, opposed to a more typical chord progression, if that makes sense. So there are all these ways that I feel so rooted in traditional music, but I don't feel anymore like I need to do it all. I think that was part of the pressure, was feeling like if I went back to Scotland or entered into traditional music settings, that I had to keep up that repertoire, or I was somehow letting down some side of myself. And I think the last decade or so has been much more affirming in, just I am who I am, and that is all I can be. And I have an aesthetic sense now that I can trust is rooted in where I came from and what happened to me along the way. And I hope I never stop being curious, and I hope it keeps developing and changing and supporting who I am in the moment. But I feel much less inner conflict than I did when I was younger. And I feel no less love for the traditional music of the countries I'm from. I mean, that music moves me like nothing else, and it gives me this anchored place in the universe, which I'm very grateful for. And I also, even, the traditional purists who hate what I do, we need them. Like, we need the preservationists, and we need those people to keep this music alive. So I also I feel no contentiousness with any of that either. They are who they are, and I am who I am, and I don't think any of us can change that.
Well, and I think musicians are in a constant. Maybe it happens forever, but I think certainly in the beginning parts of a career, or learning to play, or it's finding your voice. And voice can be your tone, your approach, your how you phrase, how you and for you to know who you are. That's such a beautiful thing, because I would imagine there's a lot of freedom in that, and you probably a certain amount of not of second guessing, and maybe being a little having to play defensively, being a little bit of making sure that you're forging your own path and not worrying how it's going to be received or by others. I mean, obviously, when you make music, you want people to like it, but you're not looking through the lens of making sure that you make this person happy because they do this, and this person happy. You're doing your own thing.
Yeah, it's so important. You're right. And I happen to come from a traditional music background, and I feel grateful that that's my path. But you're right that anyone can find their authentic self if they go deep enough, wherever they're from, whatever their path is. And it can mean so many different things. And again, when I look at many of the artists I admire, I'm going to bring Patti Smith up as an example, as someone who has so beautifully blurred the boundaries of her art making. She's a writer, she's a painter, she's a unknowing fashionista in her lack of caring what the world thinks of her, and she's a musician, and just this using what you intuitively have and love, and trusting that to hone your voice. I think is the only way forward. And I would be very suspicious of people who tell you that there's a formula to success. And if there is, perhaps it's the type of success which has a sell-by date.
That's well said. That's very well said. As we're recording this, I was looking ahead. It looks like you heading up the Rockport Celtic Festival in September. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, sure. So this is our 5th Rockport Celtic Festival. We started in 2019. I say we because it was founded by my co-artistic director, Brian O'Donovan. Brian O'Donovan was a beloved figure in public radio and NPR in the New England area. He had a Saturday afternoon show on WGBH called A Celtic Sojourn. He was also a great entrepreneur and promoter of live music, and had really successful concert series and shows. And I got to know Brian's Irish. He's also the father of the musician Aoife O'Donovan, if you know Aoife's work.
Yes. Yeah,
and a great musician himself. And his wife, Lindsay, is a wonderful musician too. And Brian always had his ear to the ground on new musicians in the Boston area. And I met him when I was 17, when I first landed in Boston, and him and Lindsay became my, adoptive American parents while I wasn't living with my Edinburgh family. And he started to hire me in his shows as a harp player, and then he would hire me to write vocal arrangements, and then as an assistant music director, and then as a music director, and then eventually he asked me to co-artist direct this festival with him. And I just mention all of that because I'm so grateful to Brian O'Donovan for the opportunities he gave me before I would have ever had a notion that I was ready for this type of different music, this different type of work, this bigger picture work in music making that wasn't just playing my instrument. And he was such a supporter of mine and such a mentor in the way that he engaged with the world and people. And so in 2019, we started the Rockport Celtic Festival at this beautiful venue in Rockport, Massachusetts called the Shallon Lou, which is, it's a very unique theatre. It's built on the ocean, and the back of the theatre is a glass wall, so you can watch the sunset as you're listening to the music. It's stunning. And he started this festival. He had many other kind of musical ventures going on, but he wanted something that was a little more experimental in format. A lot of the shows that he did were very were catering to the Irish American audience and kind of one version of Irishness, and it was always the highest quality traditional music, but it was traditional music, and that was it. And he was inspired by some of the more boutique festivals like the Kilkenny Arts Festival in Ireland or Celtic Connections Festival in Scotland, which is now a massive event. It's the biggest winter festival in Europe. But they also started out as traditional music festivals and then started to become more omnivorous in their musical tastes and invite kind of Celtic adjacent different world music artists, indie artists that were utilizing instruments of traditional origin. And we started to build this festival, which is rooted in traditional Irish and Scottish music, but prevents a whole kind of cross-curates concerts so that you have perhaps a piano trio doing a version of Debussy's La Mer next to Doug Wieselman improvising bass clarinet solo into some pure drop traditional jigs and reels, and with this idea that if we use our tradition in a way that illuminates other traditions, surely we're creating an atmosphere of empathy and curiosity, the type of atmosphere that we just want to build in the world in general.
It's beautiful.
And Brian passed away 2 years ago of a brain tumor, and yeah, we were still coming to grips with life without him because he was such a huge presence and such a advocate for traditional music in America. And so I'm continuing this festival, and as he would have wanted, kind of just following my own gut, but continuing to present fantastic traditional Irish and Scottish music in most of the concerts, but also a number of other musical styles. So this September we have, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head here, we've got the great Quebecois band L'Avent du Nord. We've got artist in residence Liz Knowles, who's an unbelievable musician, a fantastic Irish fiddler, composer. Her band Open the Door for Three will be there all weekend. She's also collaborating with the author Ben Shattuck, who's becoming a pretty big name in the literary world right now. One of his stories just got award at the Cannes Festival, starring Paul Mescal and Joseph O'Connor. And his latest book, The History of Sound, is a collection of short stories that are loosely affiliated with New England and music. And so they've been working together, and she's been creating a new piece of music for the Sunday performance. We've got fantastic Baroque musicians coming in on Saturday, Grammy-nominated violinist Christina Day and Michael Leopold, and they're going to be playing European Baroque music next to Irish musicians playing music that was happening in Ireland in the 1700s. We'll also have completely contemporary iterations. We've got Kyle Sana, an incredible musician and contemporary composer, who'll be doing some solo electric guitar stuff. It's going to be great. I mean, I think it's great, but our audiences also really seem to enjoy this curation. I host the concerts and inspired by Brian's way of being. He was so wonderful at contextualizing, and through contextualizing what the audience were hearing, being able to open them up to new sounds. So we're trying to build that at the Rockport Celtic Festival. Yeah.
What a beautiful way to bring people together and bring different styles, genres of music together, but that are all still one big beautiful thing, though, right? That's what's so wonderful about it. Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm so excited about that, and thanks to you for keeping that going. It's
the honor of my lifetime. Yeah,
absolutely. Before we go, are there what other projects are you working on these days?
Well, a number. I've got a couple of albums in the works. Myself and Irish musician Seamus Egan recorded in April, and we're editing that right now. He's a wonderful Irish musician and also kind of a film scorer and sound designer. And we came together we'd worked actually with Brian O'Donovan for years on many different projects together, but we decided to create a duo project inspired by the Shackleton story and our shared love of learning about the kind of golden age of Antarctic exploration, paired with this acknowledgement that ice, in a crude way, ice is melting, and that world which was so enticing to explorers from across the world is changing, and what once was perhaps the most austere palette on Earth won't be with us for forever. So we, and that's kind of a heady explanation, but we also are both just mesmerized by these stories of adventure and human perseverance, and also like human stupidity and why, what are they thinking? And all of it, so we created an album of compositions, through our shared lens of traditional music, but also with a lot of sound design and spoken word. And we use a lot of poetry by Melinda Mueller, a fantastic poet. And so that's been recorded, and we're working on that for a release early next year. I'm in residence right now at an art centre nearby, working on a solo harp piece every month, and it's a project called 12 Dances, which is just a solo harp project inspired by tiny, beautiful, ordinary changes in the world when we have the time and take notice. And then what else is happening? There's always Silk Road stuff going on. I just rehearsed yesterday with the saxophone player Adam O'Farrell, who's a kind of rising star in the jazz world. He was Downbeat's #1 Rise Jazz Star, I think, in the last issue. He comes from kind of great jazz lineage. His dad was Arturo O'Farrell. I should double check I'm pronouncing that right. But regardless, you can edit that out. Adam's incredible trumpet player, and he approaches soundscape in a very still, breath-filled way. It's funny, actually, as I'm talking about these collaborations I'm part of, I realize I'm often drawn towards these musicians who use a lot of space and breath, and breadth, but breath was what I was trying to say. And I don't know if that's necessarily me, but maybe it's that I love the synthesis that happens when I bring myself, which perhaps has a tendency more towards textures and melody in a more traditional sense. I know Arouge often jokes that she's the darkness and I'm the light, and we are a good balance, and working with Adam I could see a similar, maybe not darkness, but definitely the breadth and kind of conceptual thinking behind a lot of his music. Anyway, so we're rehearsing because we're going to play a duo set at Carramore in a few weeks' time, which will be a lot of fun. I'm organising the first Hudson Valley Creative Harping Retreat in October. We're going to have about 20 to 30 harp players coming to Kingston, and there's going to be a weekend of workshops and concerts. And I'm going to be going to Saudi Arabia with Silk Road. That's really exciting, working with a lot of musicians out there for the opening of the new Red Sea Museum in Jeddah. There's always stuff on the go, Brad. And, in the other moments, I'm just so enjoying being a mum and getting spaghetti sauce all over my top and using finger paints.
Well, you have such a wonderfully wonderful, varied palette of collaborations that you're getting to do, and I would imagine that variety is such a nice part of your life right now. Well, also, getting to be mom, which is what a cool thing that is, right?
It's the coolest. When people ask me how I'm doing, I always say, life is incredibly busy, incredibly full, but incredibly rich of color.
Oh, that's such a wonderful way to describe it. Yeah. Well, it has been such an honor getting to talk with you. I could sit here and talk with you for 2 more hours, but you need to go get some sleep. Because who knows, you may have to get up soon. So you need to get some sleep.
That's the truth. Yeah, I know you understand.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, Brad.
It's been such an honor talking with you, and just best of luck. And thank you for the wonderful music that you've brought so far, and for all the music that you're going to bring in the future. All right. Thank you.